Welcome, everyone. I'm Jason Green-Lowe, the Executive Director of the Center for AI Policy. Thank you for coming to our panel briefing on AI and cybersecurity. As a sort of introductory presentation, we're going to hear from Dr. Heiding, a postdoc at the Harvard Kennedy School, who has been presenting on cybersecurity at places like Black Hat and DEF CON. I enjoyed his write-up of scorecards for every English-speaking country's progress on having decent cybersecurity plans in place. He has a presentation for us on how AI can automate phishing attempts. And then after he finishes that presentation, I'll introduce the rest of the panel and we'll get started.
Thank you so much, and thanks for being here. This is going to be a very brief presentation and then a demonstration. Just give a little overview of how these AI-augmented cyber attacks can look in practice. So, my name is Heiding, thanks for the introduction. And just a quick word about phishing and what it is and why it matters for AI. So, phishing are these attacks when cyber attackers try to hack humans and the users of the systems instead of the systems themselves. So if you imagine, instead of a hacker breaking your password, the hacker just tricks you to tell them your password. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Many of these attacks are based on emails, but they can also be text messages or signal messages or anything like this. And historically, attackers had to choose between scaling these up very big, with low quality, or doing them with high quality but to individual targets. And AI is changing that quite a lot. Language models are super good at automating these attacks and just creating really personalized phishing messages and other scams that are turning out to be quite problematic. So my department has been working on this since the release of GPT-3 in 2022 and continuously evaluated AI-enabled and AI-powered scams versus human experts to see how well they fare. In 2022-23, the human experts were far better than AI models. But as we presented in our latest research from the fourth quarter of 2024, AI models now perform on par with human experts, which is quite dramatic. They also drastically reduce the cost. So I'm not going to go into the study details, but if you see it says 4 types of emails. So in this research, we always have 4 types of emails that we evaluate. It's a control group, which is just arbitrary scams. Then there's human expert emails, and AI-powered emails, and then a hybrid version. But it doesn't matter too much for now. Before showing you the demonstration, I just want to very quickly tell you how human experts does this. And there's a framework called Crichton, which is written by one of my co-authors, Aaron Wishnova, and it just tells what human experts does when they create these phishing attacks. Very narrowed down, they focus on making credible and relevant content. So if the content is to be believable, it has to be credible and legitimate, it also has to be relevant. And that's exactly what the AI models are learning to mimic. They're becoming very good at making credible and relevant content. There's also a bunch of different persuasion methods. We're not going to go into this now, but when you want to influence someone and persuade someone, you can use authority and say that I'm a person of authority, so you should listen to me. You can also use scarcity, for example, saying I only have 1 gift card left, so the first one contacts me gets it, and a lot of other techniques. The AI models are getting really good at discovering what influence principle works for what type of people, which is also very problematic for defenders. This is a big diagram. I'm not going to go into it, but I want to show that the AI tool that we built to automate this have 4 different parts. That's the only thing that matters. The first part says collect targets. That you can get targets from anywhere. For example, you can go to the darknet and you can find a breach list of all the Walmart employees, then just take that email list and feed that into the tool. Then the second list says write profile from online sources. So what the AI model does is really good at just taking all the people and going online and finding their digital footprints, which is things such as a LinkedIn profile or Facebook profile. And historically, it's been very expensive to do this for millions of people. You need to manually go online and create these profiles. But now the AI agents can do them automatically, and they do it really, really well. When they create these profiles, they create personalized messages. So instead of sending one type of scam to everyone, every scam message is individualized and personalized, which makes them really believable. And the last phase is that the AI tool is pretty good at just learning from the outcome. It sees what works, what didn't work, and continuously improves. This is going to show you the projection. It's kind of nice to have a visual for this. In 2023, the orange line here is the human expert baseline. The AI models used to be beneath it, they're not tangentially meeting it, and they're very likely increasing in the near future. That's it. I'm not going to talk about the mitigation plans, but I just want to say that, of course, at our department, everything we do ties in how to counter this, and there's a lot of mitigation plans in our research, but that's the topic for the panel discussion later. So, for the demonstration, I'm just going to show very quickly a manual version of how this all looks in the AI system. The AI goes online, it finds personalized information, and it creates personalized scans. It's going to be a manual step-by-step process now, but in real, the AI tool just does this automatically for millions of people. So, let's see here. This is the web interface of the tool. Again, this is just a manual version of it. It was pretty nice. I'm going to start with myself because that's always easiest for privacy reasons. And as you see here, I typed Heiding, which is my name. The tool always takes one keyword. So again, if we purchase a list of people from Walmart employees or congressmen, it can say a person named Walmart or a person named Harvard, because I'm affiliated to Harvard. So one keyword is very good because some people have common names, such as John Smith. So we want to help the tool out to make sure that this person found is the correct person. And that's what we need, the name and one keyword. Then it starts crawling the internet for information. And if you go to the back end here, you will hopefully see what happens. And this works quite well. So this is pretty difficult to read through the small text, but this is basically all the online searches that the tool makes. And it's pretty smart. There's not a set number of web pages it visits. It all depends on the context. So if it finds that 2 Google searches is enough, it will saturate after that. If it needs 10 searches, it will do that. So it depends on how coherent the information is. But for me here, it goes to LinkedIn, it goes to my personal web page, my Harvard Kennedy School page, and all these types of things. Then it populates our database with a lot of useful information. And there's things we could search that I'm not going to show you now, such as my interests, my colleagues, and especially colleagues are really important, because when the AI starts creating a network, it knows which people I'm interacting with, and we can use that for further scans. So, in the essence of time, I'll jump to the phishing phase. We just select a language model. We usually use OpenAI because it's good, but all of them works. The sender alias is really interesting here. Now for the demo, I'm just going to select one. But what the AI does is that it automatically creates a sender profile. So again, if I'm a researcher, you may find that the best target profile is to create another researcher. But if I'm working at a company, for example, Walmart with software, the software side of Walmart, maybe we'll pretend to be some vendor of So you create an arbitrary sender. I'm going to select this one because that fits well for me, but otherwise the tool just selects this by itself. There's a lot of different people. I'm going to select me, the information pool, not me. And the last field is a prompt template. Again, this means that I select it manually now, but when it's automated, the tool just selects them by itself. The prompt template is super important. It's the query that you give to the language model to create the phishing email. I'm not going to go into that, but this really is the heart of all of this. And then it takes all this information to create something useful for me instead of having this arbitrary Nigerian print scam or just some other type of scam. It takes a little while, and then it creates an email that maybe some of you can read. Let's see what it says now. It's always a bit different. Hi Fred, completed your work on AI-enabled cyber attacks. Yada yada, I'm Jane here at Harvard AI Security. And then it's some details apparently about a research collaboration. We're looking for a research assistant. This might be a little bit junior for me, but that's okay. And you gotta do what you gotta do, but it's fine. And then there's okay, right? And is this email perfect? It is perfect, but it's really good. And if you send this out to millions of people, everyone with their unique flares and style, you're gonna get a lot of clicks. In our research, we usually get more than 50% interactions, which is really much. So this is kind of changing the game of AI and cyber attacks. There's some defense strategies to use, but there's a lot more we need to do, and that's kind of done. Now I'm going to change the slides.
All right, thank you very much. And yeah, a 50% click-through rate on phishing is pretty impressive. I just want to introduce the rest of the panel. On my far right is Dr. Crichton. He is a research fellow at the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University. His recent research is focused on the implications of AI agents that take actions on their own, and some of his previous research involves carefully tracking the behavior of people online to see what we can learn about whether they're being exposed to malware and whether they're about to be exposed and what advertising categories they might fall into, and so on. And he's got a PhD in engineering and public policy from Carnegie Mellon. On my left is Krystal Jackson, who is a research fellow at the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity. They've been doing some excellent work on developing voluntary standards to pair with the NIST AI risk management framework to explore what those standards could look like for increasingly general purpose AI. And Krystal in particular has been looking at best practices for frontier AI systems and has been supporting AI security policy with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. On my far left is Daniel Kroese. He is the Vice President of Public Policy and Government Affairs for Palo Alto Networks. They're a leading provider of cybersecurity services, and he helps them interface with governments around the world. He's a veteran of cybersecurity policy, having worked as both a staff director on the Homeland Security Committee and as chief of staff to the ranking member on the cybersecurity subcommittee, and has been working with CISA as well and collaborating with the private sector on figuring out how to extend protection to the private sector against cyber threats, and has been one of the earliest proponents of treating cybersecurity as part of national security and part of our economic security. My organization, the Center for AI Policy, is focused particularly on catastrophic threats from artificial intelligence. So we're not cybersecurity experts in particular. That's what the expert panel is for. But we are experts on some of the capabilities that are coming up in AI and some of the threats that those pose. We see AI as likely to have more impressive capabilities than people might intuitively predict, in part because people struggle to understand exponential growth curves at an intuitive level. We're pouring more money each year into artificial intelligence. That money is buying more efficient chips each year. Those chips are running more efficient algorithms each year, and those algorithms are being connected with more effective apps and plugins each year. And the cumulative effect of all of those trends is likely to continue accelerating, in part because AI itself is now contributing to the development of better algorithms, the development of better chips. And so we think that AI's capabilities are likely to surprise people. And we also think that the risks of that are likely to be quite severe because today's AI systems are built on fundamentally insecure designs. Right? AI is trained, it's grown, it isn't constructed. In almost any other field of engineering, you would have an understanding of the key parts in the system, what their tolerances are, how they're guaranteed to behave as long as the input characteristics are common. And in AI, we just sort of train the large language models and then hope that they produce outputs that we like. And we reinforce them when they produce outputs that we like. So they're statistically likely to produce outputs. But then what happens when there's an out of scope error? Because as the capabilities rapidly accelerate, the AIs wind up taking responsibility for tasks or wind up gaining new capabilities that we might not have expected. So the Center for AI Policy's mission is to try to educate Congress about some of these risks and to prepare them to take action to mitigate them. But today we're going to be discussing the intersection between AI and cybersecurity in all of its aspects, not just the catastrophic risks. So to start off that discussion, I want to ask our panel for concrete examples of cybersecurity threats, right? What does it actually mean? Like if you get hacked or if somebody phishes you or, what are we talking about in real concrete terms? What are some of the more important cybersecurity threats out there? What does it mean to have a cybersecurity vulnerability that gets exploited? We can start with Kyle and then move down the table.
Sure. So I can try to set the table a little bit. I tend to try to break down cybersecurity threats using the CIA triad, not to be confused with the agency. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality attacks are when an adversary gains access to information that they shouldn't. So this concrete example of that would be hacking a system and exfiltrating military secrets, technologies, plans, and communications. Integrity attacks are when adversaries try to disrupt a system from functioning as it should. So think manipulating industrial controls at a power plant to cause a failure. And availability attacks try to take systems offline, prevent them from providing services. So concrete examples there include the ransomware attacks on hospitals that have locked down their systems, preventing or inhibiting the provision of service there.
I mean, that's a great sort of setting the tone for the table, and maybe I can provide some more concrete example just to take off because you said a good holistic description there. And I think that the recent hack from North Korea on Bitbyte, the cryptocurrency wallet, for $1.5 billion. That's a pretty good example of what it means. Because I think one thing we often talk about in my research group is that cyber attacks have a lot of different externalities, right? It's not just a company that is hacked that's being targeted, but there's all these kind of effects. For example, here in the US, we place sanctions against North Korea because we don't want them to build nuclear weapons. But then they can hack people and earn a lot of money. It's estimated by some sources that up to 10% of North Korean GDP comes from cyber attacks. That's incredible, right? And so that's something we don't always think about, but that's something that can happen from cyber attacks. It means a lot of things. It's not only the system that you target that's been hacked, but a lot of other things, because everything is interconnected. So cyber attacks these days is very much a policy lever. We see both China and Russia using cyber attacks as a policy lever more and more. So I think these are things we must remember as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I focused a little bit more on the intersection of AI and cyber for this one. So thank you all for kind of setting the stage there. So when I was thinking about actual severe examples of AI and cybersecurity, one of the most important things to understand that overwhelmingly the cyber attacks that happen today are financially motivated, right? And so we see an uptick in threat actors using Gen AI to continue this trend. One example that I'll highlight in just one instance, a Hong Kong-based firm lost over 25 million when threat actors used publicly available video of their chief financial officer to create a deepfake video and socially engineer folks. So I think that we're going to continue to see this trend of threat actors adopting new technologies to further their goals. And I would say that in addition to these kind of monetary damages that we see, there's also kind of the damage to our general information space. So when threat actors are not interested in profiting, but instead influencing the general public, this can also be a very widespread problem. So another example is there was a study that found that a Moscow-based group was purposefully engaging in data poisoning that affected 10 different AI models with propaganda. And they did this by flooding search results. And I think we're going to, again, continue to see this trend, not only in kind of the information space, but also when it comes to secure code generation. This is a really big deal as well. So I'll just leave it there for that, though.
All right, playing cleanup here. So Palo Networks, every year we do about 2,000 incident response cases. These are the 3 a.m. cleanup on IL6 calls. Every year we anonymize the insights from the 500 or so of those cases that we would consider major and put out an annual incident response report that has the key trends of what are we seeing in the threat landscape. And we actually published that a few weeks ago. I think the most interesting top-line trend there is that in 86% of cases, we saw operational disruption. So going to the A of the CIA triad that was talked about earlier. So these are adversaries that are looking to disrupt your business practices, not just sort of traditional espionage, or they're maybe trying to copy files and exfiltrate it for some purpose, but they're trying to inflict harm, often for their own financial gain. We have seen within that 86% them getting increasingly sophisticated to now use double, triple, and other multi-extortion techniques. So you all are probably familiar with traditional ransomware, encrypt your systems, demand Bitcoin in exchange for ostensibly giving them the key to decrypt their systems and go back to business as usual. Turns out people were pretty smart and they started getting backups. So that became less lucrative over time for the actors. So what did they do? They now, before they decrypt the systems, They scour around and find all the sensitive PII, business secrets, trade secrets, customer financial info, all the stuff that if it got leaked out public would be a bad reputational or compliance day for the company. Then they encrypt your systems, see if you'll pay that. If you do pay that, you're back up and running and you think you're out of the woods, but aha, you're not. They say, you actually got to pay us again, or if you don't, now we own all this bad stuff, and they're going to show you a teaser of what they copied, and then we're going to make that public on the dark web, and that's going to be an even worse day for you. They know you're going to pay because you already paid on the first bite at the apple, so you're likely to pay the second bite at the apple. And we've seen actually cases where they do that sequentially 3, 4, 5 times, multi-extortion, even getting to harassing, physically harassing, and virtually harassing executives at the company if they're hemming and hawing about it. So we have seen increasingly sophisticated attacks there by the adversary, but the key takeaway is operational disruption in 86% of the major cases that we saw over the last year, which is over 500 cases. So that's a scare the crap out of you beginning, but we'll get into solutions and further questions, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm scared. Thanks. I look forward to hearing about some of the solutions. First, I want to explore how the balance between cyber offense and cyber defense has changed over time. And this is something I'm genuinely curious about. I don't know the answer. It seems like as AI improves, you should be able to have an easier time finding vulnerabilities, but that applies both to finding the vulnerabilities to attack and finding them to patch them. So which trend is more important? Where were we 5 years ago in terms of offense versus defense? Where are we today? Where are we likely to be 5 years from now? Maybe Daniel, you can start us off and then we'll come back this way.
Perfect. So despite what I just laid out, I am a wild optimist, and I'll give you data to back it up, that so far, AI has actually been more impactful for network defenders. Adversaries are certainly using AI. We are seeing big gains in social engineering attacks. You saw that presentation earlier. But we think of AI for adversarial use as sort of an evolution, not a revolution, because it's allowing faster scale, faster speed, the ability to find open digital holes in networks faster. We haven't really seen novel malware being written yet by AI. It probably will happen. So you ask yourself why. Well, the why is actually sort of a sad state of affairs of the current defensive baseline. Our digital ecosystem is so porous. There are so many digital doors that are just left open all the time. If you're an adversary, why would you bang your head against the wall for 2-3 months to try to create novel malware versus just using AI to more quickly scan for existing known vulnerabilities that are left open and more quickly get in and get out? So evolution, not a revolution, much faster at doing that. In fact, our research shows 115x faster oftentimes the adversaries of getting in and getting out. However, that reality about the porous digital infrastructure that we're all trying to work to improve is actually why AI is turbocharging cyber defense. Cybersecurity is really a data problem at the end of the day. You network defenders are inundated with data from their network layer, from their cloud, from their endpoint, from identity and access management, and they are drowning and they can't actually make sense of it. It's really frustrating and really encouraging at the same time for you football fans out there. I think cybersecurity is first in goal. Like, we are almost there, but we had this data bottleneck where our security operations centers, these overworked analysts, are playing alert whack-a-mole. So you've invested in all this telemetry and tooling to give you visibility into the bad stuff, yet you have the same overworked person trying to do things manually that should not be done manually. So there's a bottleneck in the cyber ecosystem that is living in 2008, and AI is flipping that on its head, and it's so dramatically flipping that on its head that up to now, it has actually outpaced the adversarial gains that we have seen via AI. And I'll give you one stat, and then I'll change my green light to a red light and pass it on here. But so our own networks, Palo Networks, big company, we're attacked all the time. We ingest 59 billion events across our network every day that we need to make sense of to just ensure that we are safe. Using an AI-powered SOC, we distill those 59 billion events into one incident that requires investigation by a SOC analyst. The most boring room in our company's headquarters is our security operations center, because we're not living in 2008, because we are having that human capital, 65 full-time equivalents freed up to not play alert whack-a-mole and get ahead of the adversary instead. That is the only way we stay ahead of China. But we are seeing incredible results doing that. The average enterprise across America takes 6 days to respond and remediate to a cyber attack currently. When they have deployed AI-powered tools, that range becomes 14 minutes to 2 hours. 6 days to 14 minutes to 2 hours. Those are not made up numbers. We have a 70,000 customer base. That is achievable tomorrow because cybersecurity is a data problem and AI is really good at making sense of data. Adversaries are leveraging AI. I talked about how they're getting much faster, but the unnimbleness of data management in cyber defense right now is actually our opportunity because it's the baseline that we can improve upon. And the improvements are dramatic and they're dramatic overnight. And that is why, despite that scary backdrop, I'm such an optimist.
Yeah, I definitely want to plus one what my fellow panelist has said, but maybe I'll add a little bit of pessimism to the mix as well. So I think that, we definitely have seen a lot of gradual improvements thanks to AI, but in the past 5 years, we've also seen some of the largest data breaches that have ever occurred with billions of records stolen and billions of losses as well. And so when I'm looking to the future to try to understand what role AI will play, I think that it's going to play a crucial role on both sides of the equation. As much as AI has been really powerful in aspects like threat detection and automated incidents response, I also recognize that the human element is one of the biggest weaknesses. And with the rise of generative AI, in particular, deepfakes, voice cloning, the phishing example that we just saw, I definitely think it's going to be a challenge for defenders to be able to mitigate these risks and really shore up defenses. I also think that in the future, AI models will increasingly be the subject of attack, and that if we don't secure this piece of the stack as well, they're going to become a very vulnerable piece of folks' larger technology apparatus. So yeah, I want to be optimistic, but I think I'm just a little bit more pessimistic. And but the good part is that most of the folks that are working on developing AI for cyber are defenders. That's where most of the smart people are. So there's still hope. But I'll pass it to my other panelists.
Yeah, I think that these are great answers that we heard, and I generally agree. I think it's very context dependent. In my take on this, a lot of my research is just where is this an asymmetry and where is the symmetry and how AI benefits attackers and defenders. In terms of network intrusion, I definitely agree. I think a lot of historic cyber attacks just exploited low hanging fruits, and I think as a defensive community, we can remove these low hanging fruits, which will be very good. I think that's all good. In terms of attacks targeting system users and humans, as we also heard, I think there's a bigger problem because you can't just patch the human brain. It's inherently old biological hardware, and the same heuristics that we exploited for thousands of years are still there. And it's tricky, as we said, with deepfakes, with really good phishing, because you can't just do network defense against really good phishing, because the only real difference between a real good phishing email and a marketing email is the intention, basically. And the intention is really hard to detect. So we have to change our game a little bit there. But in general, there's a lot of optimism. I think that the pessimism is also very warranted because there are a lot of problems ahead. I also think that, just protecting the models is very relevant, right? We see 3 million Russian propaganda article targeting, ChatGPT to change the outputs of these things. And that's very real. It's happening. And I think that we probably need to change our game quite a lot as a defensive community. But I am very positive about the network defense things that Daniel mentioned. That's great.
All right, so I will be the pessimist. I think 5 years ago, the advantage was on the offense. I think today the advantage is on the offense. I think 5 years from now, the advantage will continue to be on the offense. And that's because there's an inherent asymmetry. An attacker can fail 1,000 times and succeed once and still achieve their objective, versus a defender has to be successful 100% of the time. Now, AI does not change that paradigm, but as my fellow panelists have pointed out, right, AI can shift the relative balance. And I won't repeat anything they said. I think they covered it quite well. I think currently with Gen AI, we are seeing a shift towards some defensive uplift and capability. I think as we start to move into the agentic space, that balance might shift back towards the offense as we start to see more complex attack vectors, faster attacks, subtler attacks.
Yeah, let's just quickly follow up on that point, Kyle. I mean, how far out are we from AI agents that can carry out a cyber offensive operation autonomously?
Well, so as we saw with Fred's demo, right, in some ways we're already there. We are seeing attacks being conducted autonomously, but in many cases also we're quite far from it. I was going to get into this a little bit or later, but I will do it now. So one challenge facing autonomous agents is the compounding error problem, which is where you have a sequence of events. Each event is dependent on the one before it. And so small errors, small variations early on in that chain can compound and lead to spectacular failures later on. LLMs have this problem in predicting the next word or the next token based on the sequence that came before it. Agents will also have this problem as they try to accomplish a series of tasks in order to achieve a goal. Until we overcome that problem, I think we won't have fully autonomous agents conducting the entire cyber kill chain end to end. But there are narrower use cases like the one that Fred just demoed, where we are seeing that impact already.
Makes sense. Let's talk for a moment about measurement and benchmarking. We heard some statistics from Daniel about, how long does it take to detect and repair a breach. Other than time to repair, how else can we measure the cybersecurity of a system or a company? And what's the future of benchmarking? How would we like to be measuring these things?
I can start. And we do a lot of work in my department with converting cyber attacks into US dollar value. I think that's way under research because it's really tricky to find out the exact cost of a cyber attack. You can look at things such as the T-Mobile data breach, and then there was a $350 million class action lawsuit, and that's a price for it, right? But you can't always have lawsuits like that, and we are pretty bad still at really narrowing down what is the worth of a cyber attack. And I think that's actually super important if we are to have more companies implement better cybersecurity, because we need to be able to clearly describe to board members, etc., what will it be worth if you're hacked. So I think that more research in this is definitely needed. We do quite a lot of work on that, and some other people do. But I think that the cyber insurances are relatively good at trying to estimating cost, but I think it's still honestly a lot of guesswork. I don't think don't have a perfect idea of the exact dollar value of cyber attacks, and I think that's the key thing we need to get better at.
This is a place where, as a company, we've been traveling the halls of Congress and talking to the Trump administration and the Biden administration before that aggressively. But there needs to be a moment now where we just decide as a community, this is the time we want to focus on cyber outcomes. Triple underline the word outcomes. I know that sounds super self-evident, but if you look over the last 15 years, it's been thing happens, SolarWinds, pick your hack, OPM hack. We didn't have visibility. We didn't know they were there because we didn't have the whiz-bang tool or the sensor, which the company makes a lot of great whiz-bang tools and sensors. We need to create a policy that says you must deploy this thing and then a corresponding funding stream so that you can deploy this thing. And now we've solved that. We've done it. Those are cyber inputs. We need cyber outputs. And implicit to the metric question is what are the vital signs of cyber health? I'm doing all this cyber stuff. Am I more resilient? And so as a company, we think you need to have those be as simplistic and automated in real time as possible, because otherwise you will drown in PDFs that are compliance checklists. That's why we like mean time to detect and mean time to respond. Everything we do for 70,000 customers has real-time data about that. The cool thing there, those terms describe exactly what you think they describe. Your CEO, who may or may not, the leader of an enterprise who may know nothing about cybersecurity, can intuitively understand those two terms and hold people accountable for them getting better every year. I also think, to add one more there, incident closeout rate, the fundamental challenge in the Security Operations Center I've talked about, which truly, across the world, they're living in 2008. That's why I'm optimist, because I actually think there is a bottleneck. We've done a lot right. We still have one bottleneck to solve. They're playing alert whack-a-mole. So if you look at your average sophisticated, spending tens of millions of dollars a year on a cyber product, Fortune 500 company, they still oftentimes have 10, 12, 15% of alerts that just go unresolved. They just can't keep up with the triage system. So it's still shockingly manual. So you should certainly have a 100% incident closeout rate and a period of time in terms of how long those stay out. If you had those real-time vital signs, mean time to detect, mean time to respond, and what your incident closeout rate is, this is something we're actively talking to the administration on. The President of the United States should be able to walk in the Situation Room and see those live stats for every civilian, every agency in the federal government. Hard stop. Like, what do you have instead? I was on the House Homeland Security Committee. We get FISMA metrics. So I was every February for the previous year, I would get an 86-page PDF from 103 federal civilian executive branch agencies that are the CISO and CIO check off a bunch of things on there about what they're sort of doing. Like, that's not resilience. Like, that's compliance. What if instead we had real-time metrics? Maybe they're not the right metrics. Maybe we decide we want to settle on different ones, but real-time metrics that through oversight and investment, we hold people's feet to the fire, that you will get better at those every year. Now we're talking about resilience. Now we can hold feet to the fire. Now cyber inputs are driving outcomes. That future is there for the taking. Like, it's right there in front of us. And that's why I'm an optimist, because I think it's a first and goal problem.
Can that work for small businesses too, or do we need a high volume of incidents to get the statistics that are meaningful in terms of outcomes?
I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I don't want to. Okay. Yeah, so complexity is killing cybersecurity. That's the challenge. Complexity is ruining cybersecurity. So as much as we can simplify things for small businesses, I think it's going to be better there. Single pane of glass. The average enterprise has 80 security tools in their stack. So if you're that person living in your 2008 mindset, you are integrating data from 80 different things. You've already lost at that point. So can we simplify things for small businesses? Shared service tools, scalable offerings, single pane of glass. Like, those are the ways that I think maybe particularly those target-rich, resource-poor entities can maybe get ahead of the game.
Can I say one thing? Yeah, I think that's very true, and I agree. I think the problem with being overly reliant on this philosophy is that the cyber attack is not linear, right? There's a lot of very weak attacks that always comes. We detect them pretty quickly. Then there's an outlier that's really expensive and changes everything. So I think that you could have a lot of organizations with really good mean time to discovery. Then there's one 0 day that they didn't catch, because all these mean time to discover attacks that was low were really simple, just mass plated attacks that were sent out. And then again, there's an outlier that changes everything. So we need more than this, right? But I think the mean time to discover is really good, but yeah, it's not linear, and we need to be able to catch the outliers too, because that's everything that really matters, I think, in terms of cyber.
Almost sounds like ideally you'd want to be able to weight the mean time to discovery by the cost to the company of not discovering it.
Yeah.
Although that might be harder for the CEO to understand in some companies. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about policy solutions, talk about what can Congress or other government bodies do to kind of cope with some of these risks or reorient the coping toward ways that are more productive. Is there anything that's sort of common ground or consensus or taken for granted inside the cybersecurity community that may have been overlooked or misunderstood by policymakers?
I can start us off. So I think some of the things that I hear from cybersecurity professionals that they want to relay to policymakers is that security really needs to be built in from the start, not treated as an afterthought. So as much as we're encouraging innovation for innovation's sake, especially within AI, we also need to encourage security innovation as well. I think that a lot of what we're seeing right now, especially in the AI space, mirrors a lot of what we saw with the shift to the cloud and IoT, that there's this kind of race and security is an afterthought. So that's one piece. I also think that there is a sense from professionals across the board, but especially those in threat intelligence, that they can't do their jobs as well without content provenance, tools to detect generative AI outputs. These are desperately needed, as well as increased information sharing, especially from AI developers and deployers, about how they're seeing threat actors use their tools in the wild. This is kind of information that needs to be shared across the board, so that a variety of actors can be informed. I also think that AI is generally like kind of burdened by this geopolitical innovation race kind of narrative that surrounds it. This discourse kind of frames major powers and the world as being in a race for technological supremacy when it comes to AI, and that there can only be one winner. However, most AI applications are not arms in a traditional sense, and I don't think that this is a useful kind of framing to think about them with. AI development can be a positive-sum game. Many companies are global companies. and security breaches hurt everyday people as well as bottom lines. This, in addition to the fact that many security professionals kind of have to constantly advocate, especially with management, for funding and for increased roles. I think that policymakers have a role to play here by supporting the work that they do with regulation, standards, and best practices that can inform the work that they have to do on the ground. So,
Can you give us an example of a policy that didn't treat cybersecurity as an afterthought, that took care of it from the beginning?
do you mean at the federal level or?
Ideally, but I'll take what I can get.
I mean, I want to say something like Cercia, but that's also very reactive. So I think that the vast majority of the proactive or forward-facing cybersecurity things that we have are voluntary best practices and standards. But yeah, maybe some of my other panelists can weigh in on that point.
I think I agree, but I think it makes some sense. It's not necessarily bad that they are voluntary because again, there's a big sort of recommendations versus regulation trade-off, and sometimes by incentivizing voluntary policies or recommendations that can be useful to the business in other ways, such as the Secure by Design does a lot of this. I think that can be very useful too. So it doesn't have to be bad that they're voluntary, because hopefully, if the market is healthy in the long run, companies want to implement these practices.
You mentioned Cercia. A lot of Congress's attention on cybersecurity has gone to Cercia, to cyber incident reporting requirements. Is this a reasonable kind of top two? Are these seem like policies that fit in the top 3 or 4 things that Congress should be focusing on cybersecurity? If so, why? If not, what are some alternatives? What might be a higher leverage kind of policy for Congress to look at in cybersec?
To me, the intellectually defensible argument for Cercia is that we live in a world of scary things, and it's intellectually defensible that there's a centralized government body that has total visibility into those scary things. We see that in other arenas other than cybersecurity. I think if there's a place where the imperative for Cercia was overstated, it was a belief that the act of those reports being filed with CISA and what they can glean from that anonymously would actually share novel threat intel that otherwise wouldn't have been known. I do think that argument is overstated quite a bit. I've been tempted, I never have, but to write some sort of lawfare blog article that like info sharing, we won. The community is actually really good at info sharing. If there's a new vulnerability or new malware sample or something that comes out, the issue is it's not shared. You're going to get it shared to you 11 times within the hour. But the structure of how we share technical cyber threat information is really sound. So I don't think Cercia likely would have eliminated much new there. It's intellectually defensible that an entity can and perhaps should know about the totality of bad things, and then they can do an annual breakdown of, this sector had 14% of incidents and this sector had 18%. Right now we're kind of guessing at that. But I think that the national, it's sort of a righteous, bad stuff's out there and one place should know it. To me, that's always been the argument that makes the most sense about it. I think some of the other arguments perhaps fall a little bit short there. But again, so as a result, would like to see it optimized to fulfill sort of the initial congressional intent.
I'll just add 2 quick thoughts. So I think Daniel's right that there is robust information sharing about cybersecurity within industry and within the sectors. One area that is sort of a gray area at the moment is how AI fits into that and how AI incidents, failures, and reporting those fits into the same scheme or does not fit into that same scheme. One area, in addition, that I think government should be also focusing on is the talent pipeline. Right? If the conversation today, if you sort of learned anything, is that AI is going to play an important role in cyber, and we already have a deficit in cyber talent. We have a deficit in AI talent. We definitely have a deficit at the intersection of those two. Creating that pipeline, getting people that have skill sets that can talk across those different disciplines are really important. And I'd say that the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, NICE, is a good example of a program that worked in the case for cyber. I think that there's potential for expanding that into the cyber and AI domains.
Also, just to address some of the gaps with AI, CCA only applies to the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, infrastructure owners and operators. So if you're thinking about AI models in particular, I think that we could learn from some of what is going on in the EU with the AI Act and the Code of Practice that's currently being developed. There are specific measures and guidance for serious incident reporting. This is, again, for a very small subset of models that would be general purpose AI systems with systemic risk. And they have provisions for, when there are serious incidents that occur that affect critical infrastructure, that have to do with self-exfiltration of model weights or other serious cyber incidents related to AI. There's mandatory reporting there. And so I don't know that that fits in nicely with anything that we currently have going on, but I think that there's a lot to learn there.
All right, I want to open it up to questions from the audience. So please raise your hand. When I call on you, please introduce yourself and say what office or company you're with, and try to keep the questions focused. Sure, in the front.
Hi, I'm Elliot Higgins. I work for Nancy Mace on the outside, and I have a question on how three-letter agencies are sharing. I think the NSA Cyber Collaboration Center is a really effective belly button there, not just for information sharing, which is, of course, important, but then through the voluntary cybersecurity DIB services they have, and we define the defense industrial base pretty broadly. They've actually offered a lot of free value to organizations that, by their association with DoD, could introduce some risk into our national security apparatus. And so, I think the work of the NSA CCC is excellent and certainly to be built upon. And then, from sort of an efficiency taxpayer standpoint, there's a scalability there. So those free services the NSA CCC offers is a place to probably derive national security benefit at a pretty cost-efficient price point.
I'm John Beezer. I'm with the Senate Commerce Committee. Fred, I noticed in your presentation, it's just a little detail, but it intrigued me. You were talking about success of different techniques, and you had AI and you had human in the loop. And AI was more successful than human in the loop. Is that correct?
So this is a great point. Usually this is a 1-hour presentation, so I didn't have time to go into all the details, but that's a really good question. And it was not more successful, but it was just 2% more successful with human in the loop. Just what that means is that with human in the loop, before the AI sends out an email, there's a human that checks, should we improve anything? Should we change anything? And that's, we measure these things in all walks of AI, right? But I think whenever human in the loop is no longer required, then AI can be said to be autonomous. And right now, AI is more or less as good as the human in the loop approach.
Trevor Whetstone, House Homeland Security Committee. You all touched on reporting requirements a little bit, so I just wanted to get your thoughts on where you think, or what kind of role regulatory harmonization needs to play in providing, a better defense.
So I think regulatory harmonization and the harmonization of a lot of the voluntary practices, both in cybersecurity and AI, includes reporting, but also is much broader than that, needs a lot of harmonization. Right now, we have tons of different frameworks, each that are very lengthy about various aspects of AI, about reporting, about cybersecurity and how they interact, that organizations have to sift through and deal with. How do they comply with these? And that's quite an onerous burden. And so I think harmonization efforts, both at NIST, CISA, and any federal agency that's putting out either guidance or requirements is going to be really important going forward.
Related to this about sort of incentivizing reporting in general, I would definitely look into Singapore and Australia's national cybersecurity strategies. They've done a really good job of separating incident response and law enforcement to incentivize companies to report cyber incidents, and it's worked really well.
Yes, Dr. Joel Berry from Senator Kelly's office. I have a question for you. Why do you think there's a lack of understanding or commitment to AI security in Congress?
Is this for anyone in particular?
Anyone who feels encouraged to answer the question.
At the end of the day, we're talking about data. It's just all about data. Someone who does cyber policy for a living, me and my team spend under 15% of our time engaging on what probably you would think of as like true cyber policy. Data governance policies that we spend all of our time on. What types of data can you collect, process, transfer, and retain for what purposes, how, and when? Like that is the policy conversation of Congress for the next decade, I feel like. And some of that takes an AI flavor, some that takes a privacy flavor. It's all sort of the same thing. It's just units of data. So I think we'd be well served on the AI security front. And first of all, just having the discipline to dissect how is AI being used for cybersecurity versus how are we securing AI systems. I do think those are two different flavors there. And then look at, we've always cared about data security. So what are the new ingredients of AI, this new AI world that presents sort of new vectors we need to think about? So the AI attack surface is now expanded since ChatGPT 2.5 years ago. So what are those things? What are these new data things that we need to have evolved security approaches for? So it's like begin to enumerate those a little bit. So we have models, we have training data, we have other data sets, we have the infrastructure that it runs on. There's sort of identity handshakes of how that traverses. There's permissions in terms of what can train on what. So kind of map like what is our new AI attack surface and where do existing data security techniques work versus maybe an evolved approach. A piece of guidance that I actually think is really promising. There is a Five Eyes guidance on deploying AI systems securely that came out last May of 2024, I think. It's probably one step less technical than the NIST special publication, so it's kind of readable for a non-technical person. But I have always felt like that translating that Five Eyes guidance, and it's not just Five Eyes, it's the other Four Eyes, and then it's CISA, FBI, and NSA. So it's covering the USG waterfront. If you could translate that into something sort of more NIST-like, and I think those efforts are already happening with the profile paper that they're seeking feedback on. I think then maybe you could sort of say, okay, this is the new stuff. The new AI attack surface demands that for these set of things, we need to have an evolved approach to data security, building on top of the decades of data security best practices that we've already had. So you kind of define the problem set. What's the right combination of carrots and sticks to do that?
I definitely agree, but I just want to add a little bit more onto this conversation because I think that when you're talking about security of AI models, part of the reason that we don't have a lot of good standards here is because it's still a very nascent and like developing field. But when you are talking about AI security, you're not just talking about stealing data anymore, though. You're also talking about stealing, if you're talking about the model weights, a model that has categorized, synthesized data, and derived insights. So it's much more powerful, especially when you talk about the threat of targeting individuals or collecting large amounts of data and being able to extrapolate from that. So I think that there are some unique security risks there that we're just not really equipped to handle, but you also need to be in consideration along with like traditional data security.
My name is Madison Penner from Congressman Palo's office. My question would be, given, I've checked the stats, but given this large volume of attacks we're seeing from state actors as opposed to non-state actors, does the policy response need to change from either policy response looking at new defensive strategy or offensive strategy?
So I have a hot take on this, but I do believe that I think that what you say is true, and we see more and more state-sponsored cyber attacks. I think we should, to some small degree, fight fire with fire more, so to speak. I mean, we have the approach, right? We receive a large cyber attacks and then we sanction. And I would be interested in opening up the conversation to have to fight fire with fire to a more strong degree.
In the back. Lisa. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my name is Nahian Sabriat. I'm with Syracuse University's Maxwell DC program. So my research interest is mostly related to quantum technologies. So I was thinking about How do you see the convergence of quantum and AI in the near or like distant future, especially with all the major companies investing in it in one hand, and also we have China investing a lot in quantum technologies.
I'll just say that we could probably have a whole panel just on quantum alone and the security risks, right, associated with that. In terms of the interaction with quantum and AI, that's a whole new world that I don't even think I feel comfortable speculating on at this point. I don't know if anyone else on the panel does.
I think that's a great point, and that's definitely to some degree another panel. But I think that the immediate things we need to do now is we obviously need to switch to quantum safe cryptography, and I think that we have a lot of these standards that are good. I think we should enforce these way more rapidly. We hope that it's 10 years away before we have quantum computers that can break current encryptions. But if that guess is wrong, things would be quite bad, including things such as AI security.
Just one thing to add on there, perhaps relevant for our House Oversight Cyber Sub representative here, but the federal government's going to go through a big hardware refresh over the next few years. We have the new NIST post-quantum cryptography algos that are going to replace RSA 2048. We don't know the exact date. RSA 2048 will be obsolete, but it's going to be a date that's sooner rather than later. The absolute most backwards government thing we could do of all time is replace legacy IT with legacy IT. Like that would be just stubbing ourselves in the toe. So it is imperative as we marshal through hardware refreshes over the next few years that we ensure those are quantum ready. Because if that date comes and it happens to be 3.5 or 4 or 5 years from now and not 10, and we look back and are like, oh shoot, we just kind of did the rope-a-dope replace legacy IT with legacy IT that's actually not quantum ready. You look yourself in the mirror and be like, wow, that one was avoidable. So that would be a tactical policy piece of advice. Quantum readiness can be baked in to smart IT procurement today.
Yeah, hey, Brendan Bordelon, tech policy reporter with Politico. I'm hoping that folks on the panel, maybe I'll kick this to Jason to start, to sort of contextualize this conversation in the broader sort of paradigm we have today. Because, we're talking about congressional priorities for AI, cyber defense, securing models. From what I've seen, the folks in charge on the Hill right now seem largely interested in deregulation in the AI space, particularly around safety, whether that's of the models or cybersecurity, mostly focused on increasing energy use for AI, ways to kind of unleash technology rather than rein it in. You see on the Hill, or sorry, in the White House, NIST has been mentioned. That agency is now at existential risk due to DOGE cuts. The AI Safety Institute, with the executive order being slashed, is at risk. How do you refocus or focus Washington on these issues that you're talking about, either narrow scope of cybersecurity or in the broader scope of AI model security, sort of the safety issues generally, but it seems like Washington is moving in a different direction?
I'm happy to take a quick stab at that. I think that we have to have a recognition that who's going to win if we do want to go back to criticize the AI race dynamics, but if we want to frame it that way, who's going to win the AI race is the person who also has AI security. We have to make that clear. Insecure models are going to be more of a risk in the long term for everybody, not just the developers of the models, but also anybody who wants to implement them in downstream applications. We have so many examples, especially in the LLM space, of organizations who had, trucks that sold for $1 or free flights or all these different, kind of consumer protection type pieces as well. But yeah, it doesn't incentivize, it's not good for your bottom line, and it's not good for the security of everyday people. And so I think tightly coupling security with innovation and how they feed into one another and promote one another is going to be really vital for the next couple of years.
So I will say that we're seeing a shift, and I think you described it very well. And personally, I don't agree with necessarily that shift away from AI safety, but I will say that AI safety has largely been the emphasis, right, in the US when it's approached AI. I think there is an opportunity here to refocus on AI security. And some of the discussions that we've had here today, at that same time, safety is still critically important as well. But a balance of both, I think, is important moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think the outcomes that Daniel mentioned will be helpful. The narrative has been against waste, fraud, and abuse. And what does that look like in the context of cybersecurity? It could well look like producing an 80-page PDF talking about individual measures you took that are obsolete by the time you finish printing the PDF. So I think if we can show people that there's real cybersecurity outcomes to be had, that will be of enduring interest to the policy community. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Stephanie with House Science. I wanted to ask your thoughts on policy to support AI incident reporting at the federal level. Mainly, what are your thoughts on how it should differ from current cyber incident reporting? So thinking about parallels to CWE, CVE, and NPD, things like that.
I think the main point of feedback I provide there is it always comes back to the definitions, you know well. So what is an adverse AI incident that is then reportable? I think to the extent that can be completely disaggregated from existing cyber incidents, which have their own reporting regimes. So tightly define what an adverse AI incident is for the purpose of the legislation, and then have that be the basis of where there's some element of voluntary or compulsory reporting. I think when those two concepts get blended, as we've sort of reviewed stuff through trade associations, when those two concepts get blended, that's where, at least from my simplistic brain, where it starts to hurt a little bit.
We've run out of official time for the event. I encourage everyone to sign in on your way out if you haven't already. We'll be sending around a research paper on AI and cybersecurity later this week. You can also visit centeraipolicy.us, check out our blog, our podcast, our newsletter, find out about more events like this. I believe our next event is about AI agents. Thank you. .org, centeraipolicy.org. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to our excellent panelists for a highly informative discussion.